Hello and happy Saturday. Welcome back to our lesson this week talking about how God is our refuge or God is our fortress. When we talked on Wednesday, we were talking about Psalm 46, about how God was our fortress and what that really means for God to be our fortress and kind of what that imagery describes. And so we're going to go a little bit more in depth with that today, talking about a couple other verses, and it's going to be a good time.
It's interesting to see that a lot of people throughout the whole Old Testament really had difficulties in their lives. They had persecutions, they had people who wanted them dead. David is actually one of the main characters who, ultimately became a king over Israel. But he, before really establishing himself as a king, he had many enemies that wanted to attack him. So a lot of the Psalms that we can go and we go while we go through the Psalms of the Bible are all about running to God and seeking refuge in him. We talked about Psalm 46, but here in another Psalm, Psalm 18, it starts like this. I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies. The cords of death entangled me, the torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me, the snares of death confronted me. In my distress, I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help. From his temple, he heard my voice. My cry came before him into his ears. This is really just shows us where does this refuge go towards. It even confronts the idea of, let's say, death, of pain, of suffering. That once we go all the way into the New Testament, we see that we have refuge also from what is eternal death, and that is through Jesus Christ. And that is it's such an amazing account that we have, that not only can we experience refuge here and God as our refuge here on earth, and that is through maybe problems, maybe for what we're facing, the situation that we're facing now, but we also will have this refuge from eternal death, thanks to what Jesus did. And I do want to at least mention one other verse, and this is Psalm 118:8. I hope you remember it because it's considered to be the psalm that's right in the middle of the Bible. It is actually states, it is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in humans. And this is definitely where faith comes into play, because there will be a lot of people around us that it says, you know what's happening, there's nothing that we can do about it, we will suffer and we have no hope. And I want to say, and what the Bible says, that that's not true. Because when we face problems, when we have difficulties, we can actually run to God and find refuge in him there.
And the really cool thing about this is that when we run to God, God actually cares about our problems. He cares about the things that we're dealing with. So much so that in the Old Testament, there's this great example. So when the Israelites were rescued from Egypt, and God took them out into and started moving them towards the promised land. And they got to the promised land. They started setting up their cities and things like that, and establishing their own homes. God set up some rules for how these things were going to be divided, how people should interact with one another, and just at a really basic level, just saying, hey, this is how things are going to run. And one of those things that he did was he established throughout the whole region, he established a couple of key cities that were called places of refuge. And what these places were supposed to be for was, for example, if you were in your city, you got into an argument with somebody or something like that, and you accidentally killed them, you could run to this city of refuge. And as long as you got there before you got caught by people who wanted to, put you on trial for it, then you were safe. They couldn't come, they couldn't come into the city to come and just arrest you and take you back and have trial. These cities were for specifically for if it was an accident, you hadn't meant to kill anybody, you could literally live there and you could live in peace because that's what God had said. And it really just shows, how much God cares even about things like that. But the key was you had to get to that city quickly. You had to be able to make that journey and you had to get there fast. If you waited at any amount of time, the people who wanted to put you on trial could catch up with you and they could bring you back. And if you weren't in that city, then you had to go. And it really just illustrates the point of even if you've done something and you haven't meant to do something, like you've sinned or anything like that, and you really didn't mean to, or even if you did mean to, the trick is you have to run to God and you got to get there as quickly as possible because He will be that refuge for you. He will protect you. And even though you've done something wrong, you turning to God is already admitting that you did something wrong. And it's allowing God to cover you and protect you and just really be part of what you're going through. And so we want to encourage you in this time of, trust in God because He wants to give you refuge. He's not just a big mean God who wants to be like, oh, well, you did something wrong, so you have to do this. He wants to take care of you. He wants to protect you and He wants to help you through this. And so turn to God, take refuge in God. Let God be your fortress because it is better to take refuge in God than it is to trust in humans.
Yeah, and this time really reminds us about how life itself can also be very short. And if you have been thinking about getting closer to God or knowing who God is, well, it's better to do that now because you never know when the chance will be taken away from you. And a lot of people like myself will procrastinate the very important things in life. And, knowing who God is very important. And before it is too late, seek Him. Mm-hmm. And He will provide refuge. So, well, thank you for listening again. We hope that you will stay tuned and just rely on the Lord. He's our provider. He is our refuge. He is almighty. And we hope to continue on with this series and that you will be able to, learn who God is. So,
we'll see ya.
Stay tuned.